trail, and we've been going through a series here on why does God allow pain and suffering. Well, today we want to focus on the idea that God allows pain and suffering in our lives to give us insights. And, that may seem a little bit, thanks but no thanks type of thing. I'd rather have a simple life than one that's informed, but or at least one that's wise. But we're going to see how God uses these types of circumstances in our lives to reveal some very important things to us. So we're going to talk more about that in just a moment. We'll be right back. Hello, Karen. Welcome to the broadcast. It's always good to have you here.
Well, thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah. So when you were thinking about this particular episode of pain and suffering, that and God allows pain and suffering in our lives to give us insights.
Mm-hmm.
How about in your life? Has the difficult circumstances that you have faced along the way ever provided you with important insights?
Yeah, I think sometimes you don't get to those discoveries unless you struggle, and
Yeah.
so also once you've gone through something, then it opens up the opportunity for you to be able to help somebody else as they're going through something.
Yeah,
So,
that's so important. You know,
mhm, yeah,
I tell I sometimes explain it as the gift of pain, and it is. It really is a gift
yeah.
that, and it opens up the door for us to truly minister to others. What one or two insights have you gained from the difficult experiences that you faced?
Yeah, so I guess like one of my more significant struggles
Mm-hmm.
taught me that there are actual like wolves in sheep's clothing within the church. And so I always thought, oh, there's just like different degrees of Christians, like, oh, this person's still like a baby in their faith, or,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they messed up or whatever, and I'd excuse a lot of bad behaviors, but it wasn't until like I got like, my neck chomped on a little bit by a wolf that I
Your
realized,
neck
hey,
and
some
your
of
and
these
your
people
leg.
I was thinking, oh, they're just sheep that are like misbehaving, but no, this was
Mm-hmm.
an actual wolf that was
Mm-hmm.
pretending to be a sheep. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that was a big lesson and provided a lot of insights for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then through that, also like just an examining of like scriptures and just seeing so many things open up from that, like relating to David, relating to uh, the fruit of the spirit and the acts of the
Mm-hmm.
flesh and all this kind of stuff, where it's like, oh, is this a lot of this is really coming to life
To
in my
life.
own life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one thing to read it in the book, and it's quite another thing to see it out in lived experience.
Yeah,
You know.
exactly.
So,
So,
we've been harvesting clips from Charles Stanley, and
mhm.
he has a little YouTube video about why does God allow pain and suffering. And let's look at one of these clips, and then we can talk a little bit about what he says. So let's just go ahead and watch that at this time.
Imagine what kind of condition you would be in very shortly. So, all pain and all suffering is not bad. Pain and suffering are here for a reason. And one of those reasons is to alert us to danger. Then, of course, is it not true that suffering and pain reveals who we are? Because it's one thing to rejoice and to be happy, go lucky, or whatever it might be, when everything's going our way. How do we respond when things are not going our way? How do we respond when we're sick? How do we respond when we are confined? where we don't like being confined in the bed, and especially if you're a person who loves the outdoors and you're up and at 'em and you have lots of energy and all of a sudden you don't have any.
Yeah. So, in that clip, and I know it's a short clip, but I love it because there's there's two important things that he talks about in that clip, and one is that pain and suffering helps us. It helps us from our outside perspective and our inside perspective. So outside, it alerts us to the dangers in the world that are around us. And then inside, it also helps us to give some consideration to our own personal response to when we've been hurt.
Yeah.
So that I know that you like to say, and that our response or my response is what?
My responsibility.
Yeah, that's a good. My response is my responsibility. And so
Yeah.
when it comes to being hurt by others, is that, people will trigger us, in our lives. And then we feel oftentimes justified in lashing back or responding in unhealthy ways. And there's a great Bible passage. Let me just bring it up on the screen here for a moment, because I think like it is one of the most misunderstood passages. And of course, there's a lot of passages that fall into that category. But here it is. It says, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Let me tell you a couple things that's not saying. It's not teaching, the way to respond to bad actors is just by being nice to them. That's not what this passage of Scripture is teaching. That what this passage of Scripture is not teaching is that when your spouse or a loved one or your coworker or your boss or whoever else is doing wrong things, if they're acting in unhealthy ways, that you do not change them by just trying harder.
Yeah.
Is that when you're dealing with somebody who is a bad actor, that no matter how well you play your role, isn't going to turn that person into a good actor. So
Yeah.
but
But a
go
good
ahead.
thing that you could do is to, get help, get out of it, take a time off, something like that. It doesn't necessarily mean good doesn't equal putting up with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
But
here's
but
some.
good could be
Go
what
ahead.
is the best interest of both parties.
Yeah. So what's it? And one way that I like to frame this is that, in particular when I'm coaching people with respect to marriage and relationships, is that if you make health your top priority in relationship, and I'm not talking about physical health, I'm talking about spiritual and emotional and relational health. And obviously it's good to take care of your bodies too, but if you make health your top priority in your relationship, that you will never go wrong. Because there's always a healthier way to respond to a person who is being dysfunctional. And there is always a healthy way to respond to somebody who betrays you. There's always a healthy way to respond to someone who hurts you. And so you're
Yeah.
never going to go wrong if you make health your number one goal in relationships. The big mistake that people make is that they make happiness the number one goal.
Yeah.
And when you make happiness, it's almost guaranteed that when you make happiness your number one goal, that you're going to miss the mark on that one.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
But if you make health your number one goal,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to discover that happiness is thrown in
Yeah.
as a bonus, you know.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
And Janice and I are coming up this Saturday on 50 years of marriage. And
Whoa.
so I'm telling you right now, longevity doesn't necessarily mean that you've earned the right to be listened to, you know. but but we have picked up some important insights along the way. Hey, let me just give you a couple other things. We talked about what this passage doesn't mean. Let me talk a little bit about what it does mean, and you've mentioned that already. But here are some things that you can incorporate into your relationships when you've been hurt or betrayed. And one is grief. You will never go wrong. Jesus says in Matthew 5:4 that blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. The problem is that we throw things, or we pout, or we shut down, or we get into the pity party, or we drink ourselves into comfort, quote unquote, or take dope, or have serial relationships, or whatever else. Blessed are those who mourn. So learning how to grieve properly. Grief is the sadness that cures sadness. They will be comforted. But then another important, and we have a whole lesson on this, YouTube, a whole series on it at our New Destiny coaching page, is forgiving, learning how to forgive appropriately, and that will set your wounded heart free. But also another good thing that you can do, like this passage of Scripture says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Another good thing is that you can set healthy boundaries. Boundaries are essentially, it's not about punishing the other person. It's I like to call them redemptive boundaries. So in other words, and a boundary is really what you set upon yourself. So, and it's really the answer to what am I willing to tolerate in this relationship?
Yeah.
And I always tell people that you get what you tolerate. You tolerate abuse, you get abuse. You tolerate disrespect, you get disrespect. You tolerate alcoholism, you get alcoholism. If you tolerate drug abuse, you get drug abuse, and on and on and on. You get what you tolerate, So then another thing, you overcome evil with good. And this is so important, and I have actually a whole course on this that we'll ultimately explore. I know that you're starting to work your way through it, and helping another one of my clients is learning proper or healthy conflict resolution skills.
Yeah.
Most people don't. Most people just kind of improvise when it comes to conflict resolution, and it's been my experience, both my lived experience as well as my experience in observing other people, is that when you improvise in your conflict resolution skills, it normally ends up in a disaster.
Yeah.
We have to be taught healthy conflict resolution skills, or at least that needs to be modeled in our family of origin. And in most of our family of origins, we didn't have that modeled to us in healthy ways.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Any thoughts about all that stuff?
Yeah, it's good insights for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It takes a lot of work to be in a marriage relationship, and 50 years is a big accomplishment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're excited about that.
Yeah.
So, one other thing with this, coming back to this theme of you don't overcome evil, or don't be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. One other thing that I would add into that is learning to identify and incorporate healthy relationship skills.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and we've mentioned some of those, but that's not the only one that we talked or that you can add into your relationships. Okay, so we talked about outside and inside,
Mm-hmm.
that pain and suffering alert us to danger, and pain and suffering also helps us to consider our responses.
Yeah.
I want to
One
say,
thing that
go ahead, go ahead.
one thing that I've been thinking about with and that follows along that line of our responses is that um, it doesn't really matter so much why I suffer,
Mm-hmm.
but it matters how I suffer.
Yeah,
Because I may
yeah,
never know why I have to endure the things that I have to endure.
yeah.
But the way that I endure them and the way that I conduct myself through those trials is going to be an example to other people. Either a
Mm-hmm.
good example or a bad example, you
Yeah,
know? And I'd
yeah,
like for it to be a good example of how to
yeah.
handle difficult times, you know?
Mm-hmm. It would be nice that if always we responded. But by the way, you can you can always you can always manage any conflict in a healthy you can always manage your response in a healthy way, even when you fumble the ball.
Yeah.
And the way you do that is that you make an appropriate apology and amends. you
Hmm.
know because I have not, I know it's hard to believe, but I have not been perfect in my relationship over the last 50 years. And there have been, and it's like what Elton John once said, sorry seems to be the hardest word, you know. But as Forrest Gump once said, well, I'm modifying his, as sorry is as sorry does, you know. So, you know, I want to say one thing about, because it came to my mind when
Hmm.
Dr. Stanley was speaking, is that the outsides, that pain and suffering can alert us to danger.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes when it comes to relationships, our people picker is broken,
Hmm.
and we tend to find ourselves in relationships that are painful and bring suffering to our lives. And I think that sometimes what we do is that we overlook red flags, and we make excuses for people when there are things in how they treat us that have no place in a healthy relationship. You
Well, what person are you going to pick that's not going to give you pain?
know, well, there is some of it is. Yeah, it's a good question. What person are you going to
I
pick that's
mean,
not going to
every
give you
person
pain?
is
Yeah.
going to disappoint you because they're human. So there's going to
Mm-hmm.
always be like, I mean, yeah, I think that there is people do have a tendency to have a habit of going towards the same things, even if it's the same thing that they wanted to avoid from their,
Mm-hmm.
childhood. They end up in the
Mm-hmm.
similar
Yeah.
relationships, but yeah, I mean, I doubt that there's one person out there that goes, I picked the winner. There's nothing wrong with my mate.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't ask Janice.
But then wait, if you ask that person's mate, then
Yeah.
they'd say, "Oh, my people picker was broken."
Yeah. But there is, and I hear what you're saying, and I agree with it. But there's also a bandwidth,
Yeah, sure.
and there's a bandwidth of essentially where we would say, in medical terms, it's within normal limits.
Hmm.
There are when you get your blood test, it comes back and it says it's within normal limits. Well, but there's also things that are outside of those. These are warning signals. There are certain things that are within normal limits when it comes to healthy relationships, and when you're looking at another person and you're considering them about taking that relationship further, there's that within normal limits thing. But when you start making excuses for unhealthy behaviors or tendencies, then you're in denial about what they can bring to the relationship, and the grief and the hurt that they may cause you. So you're right. There is nobody who isn't going to disappoint you.
Yeah.
But we can be wise with respect to the relationships that we enter into, whether they are marriage relationships or work relationships or friendships.
Yeah.
Or church relationships. Yeah. I was just thinking, and then we'll wrap this thing up. I was just thinking that it would be wonderful if churches had those letter grades like restaurants.
Yeah.
And you go to some church and it has an A or a B, and if you go to a church where it's kind of C or D, you're inviting trouble.
Right.
So
Yeah.
So, anything that you'd like to say before we wrap this thing up today?
Yeah. Sometimes you don't realize that the church is an F until you've been in it long enough.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
And then if you try to kind of like, if you try to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, then you're just going to be frustrating yourself, So, but all right. Well, Karen, it's always a delight to visit with you. I appreciate your insights and your comments, And so I'm going to wrap this thing up, and then we'll connect again here next week.
All right. Thank you.
All right, cool. So, we have this whole ministry of Beyond Betrayal, and our goal is to help people who feel cheated by life, others, or God. And, like who doesn't fit in that category? Is that particularly, we find a lot of folks who are struggling in their relationships, and we want to offer up whatever help that we can to help them along the way. But also, one of the things that I'm just really passionately interested in is people who feel cheated by God. And, hey, I'm doing my best here, God, and then you allow these things to blow up in my face. And so I'm interested in visiting with you on that. We will explore that maybe in some future broadcasts. I have a whole coaching program that I've developed with respect to that need too. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope that you will catch our next broadcast on this. We don't really have so much of a set time on this because of Karen and my schedule, but we will just continue cranking out material as long as we're able, and God blesses us with that ability. So thanks for watching. I hope to see you next